So, you've seen the photos, you've seen the videos, and you've decided it's time to get in on the steelhead action. Come to the right place, because today I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about drift fishing for steelhead in the Lake Erie region. So we're out here today in a river in eastern Ohio, and I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about drifting for steelhead and how to be successful. But before I can teach you anything out here on the river, we're going to take a trip back to my house, and I'm going to show you all the tackle and accessories you need to be outfitted to correctly drift for steelhead. All right guys, so we're back at the house. I want to welcome you back in here. Before we start talking about the terminal tackle aspect of things, I want to briefly touch on a couple key features of rods and reels. Now, when it comes to rods, you want something that is going to be roughly 9 feet to 13 feet. That's kind of the average range for a drift fishing rig. Now, the weight on these rods, you want something that's between like a 2 to 6 pound or a 4 to 12 or something in that range that's going to give you lots of flex. And there's a reason for this. When you're fighting these fish, they're very powerful and you have to use light tackle to catch them. I'm talking 10 pound, 8 pound, 6 pound, even 4 pound leaders. So you need a rod that's going to flex and bend to help you fight these fish on lighter line ratings, okay? Reel-wise, sky's the limit, really. I mean, you can buy just about anything you want. Spinning reel, bait caster, center pin, fly rod, whatever your choice is, they'll all work just fine. As far as money goes, just like anything else, the sky is the limit on that as well. You can start out and get yourself a good steelhead spin fishing rig for about $70 out the door, and you can get up into $1,000 for just a pin alone. So there's definitely a huge variation in prices and quality of equipment, and it just all depends on, you know, what you're willing to invest in the sport to get started. Now, when it comes to terminal tackle, there's gonna be a couple key things you wanna look at. For hooks, we're running size 10, size 8, and size 6 egg hooks. Now, you kind of want to vary your sizes depending on what you're going to run as far as bait's concerned. Generally speaking, a size 8 and a size 10 are what we normally run with. You're going to want an assortment of split shot sizes, and you're also going to want to have some type of swivel units to connect your main line to your leader. Now, the next major piece in your terminal tackle selection are going to be the floats. Now, up top here, these are the floats that you're going to be running on any conventional rig that's not a fly rod. Generally for the Lake Erie regions, you want something between 8 grams, and this one at the bottom here is 4.2 grams. So if you get a couple in each one of these sizes, it's going to give you the selection to take care of most of the rivers you're going to run across fishing in the Lake Erie region. And I'll kind of explain a little bit more later on why you want to have multiples of each. For the fly guys out there, these are just a couple of styles of airlock floats that you can put on your line depending on the size you want. They're all going to be totally adjustable, and that's going to be probably your absolute best option for some type of indicator rig on a fly rod. If you do some research, you'll realize that people also use yarn, they use dry flies, and they've even actually just taken these, cut the stems off them, and use these as well. But that's going to be your basic options for floating rigs for your terminal tackle. When it comes to selecting baits to drift fish for steelhead, there are some different options out there. I'm going to kind of go through some of them with you here. Number one, you're going to have your jigs. So these jigs can vary from 1/64 ounce all the way up to 1/8 ounce. If you can see here, this one actually has a spinner attached to it. That's a very effective way to drift for trout. Any type of trout really, especially steelhead. Now, one term you guys may have heard coming through the groups or looking at pictures and stuff like that is the term jig and maggots. And what that term means, it's one of these style of jigs, and they're usually tipped with maggots. But I will tell you from experience, that works. You can use super worms, bits of nightcrawler. Any type of live bait presentation coupled with a jig is usually a pretty deadly selection. Now, for the fly guys out there, you're looking at sucker spawn and single egg patterns are going to mainly be what you'll drift with. These are obviously very good options. There's a ton of other ones out there. For the fly fishing guys, you're going to kind of have to experiment with what you like. Obviously, my favorite method, the tried and true eggs. These are actual steelhead eggs that have been cured and tied in a sack. If that's something you guys want to see a video on how to actually harvest, cure, and tie egg sacks, I'd be more than happy to do it for you guys. And then lastly here, we have what's called the bead technique. Now this rig here is a little bit different from everything else you've seen here. This is actually designed to imitate a single egg of either a salmon or a steelhead drifting down the river. And you'll notice here, one of the tricks here, this is 3 finger lengths from the hook. That's how far you want to make it. Some guys will do 2, but anything between 2 and 3 finger lengths from the hook, that's where you want to set your bead. Another kind of trick for you guys, especially the fly fishing guys out there, if you're not a diehard purist that has to catch them on a fly, you can drift a bead on a fly rod and do quite a bit of damage. That's actually personally my favorite way to fish a fly rod, is with a bead. So that's going to kind of cover the selection of some of the more basic options for drift fishing for steelhead that I have used all of them, and I have caught numerous fish in all of them, so I can guarantee that this will effectively catch steelhead for you. Now when it comes to the main line for your floating rig, monofilament is going to be my go-to, and it's specifically floating monofilament, and I'll kind of explain why. So you'll see guys use braid, and braid will work just fine because it floats. However, as soon as it gets cold out, braid will freeze. It's gonna cause more water to hit your eyelets and freeze your eyelets, and it also won't reel correctly. So that's why we've all pretty much gone to monofilament, and that's all I use. This model here is actually, I believe from China, it's called Sunline, and it's a floating monofilament. It's high vis as well. This allows me to be able to mend my line very easily, keep it off the water, and keep it from sinking down below the water level to keep a cleaner drift. Now, one other thing that I'll mention that's one of those tips that you might not know, but it can be a real game changer for you. You wanna make sure whatever test your main line is, this one's 8, you wanna use a leader that is of a lesser pound test. So generally I will either run 8 pound or 10 pound main line, and then 2 pounds less on the leader. And the reason for that is if your rig is to get snagged on anything you have to snap off, you won't lose your float. You may lose the hook, you may lose your swivel, but for the most part, you're not going to lose your float and hopefully some of your other terminal tackle. And it just makes it easier to retie, and also keeps a bunch of junk out of the rivers. So that's gonna be one of the major things you wanna pay attention to here when you are selecting a line to go on your rig. So lastly, the end part of your rig is gonna be fluorocarbon. So I tend to carry 3 different sizes, 8 pound, 10 pound, and 6 pound. And I generally tend to go back and forth between all of them, and I'll kind of explain why. So in low clear water conditions, you'll wanna use the 6 pound to make your rig as, invisible as possible. And then also when I'm fishing areas that are heavily encased in brush or murky conditions, I will go as far up as 10, just to kind of give myself more ability to pull those fish out of the holes before they're able to dig themselves down in the debris and everything else. Generally though, 8 pound is where I live. This is generally what you use year round. It'll get through all of these for you, and you always want to make sure you use a reputable line. Seaguar seems to be the most abrasive resistant in my experience, and the Trilene has also been very good, and this is the Berkley Vanish. Any of the Berkley fluorocarbon leaders tend to work just fine, but you'll want to invest in a couple different sizes of this. For the fly guys out there, it's the same idea in tippet. A lot of fly guys will go smaller, 8 pound, 6 pound, 4 pound. I'll kind of leave it up to you on what you want to try there. It's going to be kind of trial and error for the rivers you decide to fish on what you actually use. So here is a basic float rig setup that I've put together here using some of my pink braided line I use for saltwater fishing, just so it'd be a little more visual for you guys. We have our float set up here with the largest split shot right beneath the float. I call this the preload split shot. This allows the float to actually to ride a little bit lower in the water level, and kind of loads it up to drift correctly, and also means that it takes less effort to actually pull your float down, so you're going to see more sensitive bites. Then we have the swivel here, so this would be considered your main line, and then this would go to your your fluorocarbon leader. You have your swivel, you have a slightly smaller split shot, and then your smallest split shot, and then your hook. Now, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna put an image up on the screen right now, and I want you guys to pause the video, do whatever you gotta do, pull out your cell phones, take a picture of this, and keep it with you. Live by it, it's your Bible. It's gonna show you what your rig is supposed to look like underwater, and appropriate, fishing techniques for a steelhead fish where they sit. It's gonna show you how the bobber is supposed to ride all the way down to your bait presentation. It is paramount your bait reaches the fish before the rest of your terminal tackle does. They're not exactly the smartest fish in the world, but they know something's up when you hit them with your line. If they see things not drifting correctly, the wrong speed, the wrong angle, they will not eat it. You will see a massive difference if you make sure your drifts are spent correctly. Also, if you look here, the nice thing I like about these floats, they're adjustable. I can move this up the line, I can move it down the line, and that's extremely important because every different hole you go to, you need to adjust to make sure you're floating in that bottom quarter of the river. All right, so it's extremely important when you're drifting for steelhead that your rig is floating down the river correctly. That being either your bobber standing straight up and down or slightly angled upstream. That way your bait presentation reaches the fish before any of your terminal tackle. I'm gonna put an image up right now It's going to depict all the different ways your bobber can float and how to correct it if you see it. So this is another one that's really good for you guys to go ahead and screenshot and keep it on your phone. Now, if your float is facing top upstream as it's coming down, it generally means that you don't have enough weight towards the top of your rig. So either adjust your weights or add more to get your bobber floating flat again, or I'm sorry, vertical again. Now, if your float is angled downstream as you're floating your rig, it generally means that you're dragging bottom. So you're either too deep or you have too much weight down at the actual bait presentation. So if you can get it straight up and down or slightly angled upstream, you're in much better shape and it ups your chances of catching fish. Now, when it comes to locating fish in the actual river, you're gonna look for anything that's considered a water change. You may have heard terms like eddy, backwater, current seam, river seam. Any of these things, they're gonna be considered just basically a change in the water. That's what you wanna look for. And in this image here, you can see based on the bubble lines where the current's flowing, and that's where I'm gonna spend my time drifting. So when you're casting, you wanna do either directly across the river or quartering slightly downriver to make sure that you've got proper tension on your line as it drifts. Now, sometimes I will cast a little bit upstream to make sure my bait's deep enough in the water column by the time it reaches the section that I actually wanna drift. They're generally sitting outside of the current, right on the edge of it, watching for things to come downriver. And as you can see here, it was pretty successful. I was able to pull a fish or two out of here. All right, guys, so that concludes our series here on how to properly drift fish for steelhead, specifically in the Lake Erie region, because that's where I fish. If you guys have any questions about anything you learned, please feel free to comment down below. I'll do my best to help you out and sort out any issues you're having. But before we take off here, I want to remind you guys, please subscribe. It helps me out a lot, and we got a lot of awesome content coming up here in the near future. But I want to leave you with 3 tips that will greatly up your chances of catching steelhead. So the first tip, number 1, is going to be the best guide you will ever have for steelhead fishing are the pair of boots sitting in the corner of your house. I know that sounds redundant, but I hear a lot of people asking questions about finding spots or how to do things or this, and it really just comes down to get out there and get on the river. The more time you spend on the river, the more chances you're gonna have of catching fish. It takes me back to an old saying, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but you teach a man a fish, you feed him for a lifetime. I could take any of you out to any one of my holes, put you on it, and show you how to drift, and you'd probably catch a fish. But that's not gonna help you when I'm not with you, or when maybe that hole doesn't produce anymore and you gotta go find your own water. The best thing to do is just go out, walk the rivers, find new areas, put them in your brain, and then you have, before you know it, you're gonna have a whole mental map of areas to fish, and you're gonna be wildly more successful. Number 2, invest in good gear. Good comfortable waders, good comfortable boots, good quality rod and reel are gonna go a long way. I know, like anything else, it's kind of hard to invest a lot of money into something, especially when you're just picking it up, or gear that's very specific to a fish. Now, the third tip here, it's also pretty redundant, but take care of the fish. So these aren't salmon. These fish don't spawn and die. They spawn, they return to the lake, and they come back and they spawn annually. Some of the steelhead you're catching could be upwards of a decade old. The better you handle them and the better you take care of them once you've caught the fish, the better chances you're gonna have in the future of having more sustainable fish to catch. So that's really all there is to it. Thank you so much for watching, tuning in, and like always, fish on.